I'll start again. Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're here with BTFL committee members, Jane, who is the project manager, and Debbie, who is the... I just literally wanted to go blank then. Right. I'll say you. Good morning. We're here with two committee members from Birmingham Trees for Life, which is Debbie, Development Officer, and Jane, Project Manager. And we're here to talk about trees, obviously, but primarily what trees mean to these committee members. They've both worked at BTFL for quite some time and had quite a positive impact, which is wonderful. So we just wanted to start with a very informal chat about probably the first question: when trees first impacted you, you know, when they really started to make a difference and you really started to think about them. So
the first tree I remember was in my childhood. We had an old apple tree in our garden. The house we lived in had been built in the 1920s, and I think that the apple tree had been planted quite soon after the house had been built. And it was just a beautiful old tree, but it's a Bramley apple and it produced loads of apples, and it's actually still there and still producing apples, and it must be 80 or 90 years old by now. And it's got such character in all the branches. It's got lichen and moss on it, and the birds absolutely love it because it's always full of insects. So it's just a brilliant tree, and I think that's the tree I first remember noticing from childhood.
And it's still there?
Yeah, still there and still producing apples every year.
Wow. What about you, Deb?
Well, strangely, it would have been an apple tree as well, because exactly the same. In our garden, we had 3 apple trees. The oldest one, unfortunately, is not still there, probably because there are lots of photographs of me and my brother climbing it, and that might not have done it much good at all over the years. But the smaller tree, apple tree, is still there, and my dad still lives in the house, and he's added plums and pears and other orchard trees to the garden, so it's not on its own. But yes, funnily enough, an apple tree as well is the first tree that I really remember. But I think trees sort of became important to me. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I've got an old school book, and we had to do a project on something, and I chose to do trees. I don't know why, really, but I still have this book from when I was at primary school with a project all about trees in it. It may well have been that I had a book, and one of the first books that I had as a child was about trees. So
do you remember the name of it?
I think it was like an I Spy, you know, the I Spy series, with because they used to have hardback ones then with drawn pictures in them. So I think it was an I Spy Trees book, and I think that was probably one of the first books that I had.
Okay. I think fruit trees and trees in general for kids are things to climb on and just nick fruit from if they're not actually your tree. We used to go scrumping a lot when we were kids. It was just the thrill of it, really. I think it's just taking fruit. It's just exciting, I think, and just climbing a tree, which is probably not the right thing to do now, but you know, as a kid, that's all you wanted to do, isn't it? Climb a tree.
I think tree climbing is coming back. I think we're changing a bit in our attitude, and although, as I say, you've got to think about the tree as well. I think that's
the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So next question is quite obvious, but it's important to ask it. The value of trees to you personally, you know, as you've gone through life, and just how important they are and why, really.
I think it's 2 things for me. Firstly, the way they look and the way they make your surroundings look. Because I've lived in the city now for 30 years, more than 30 years, 35 years I've lived in Birmingham. And I can't imagine what it would be like to live in a city that didn't have trees and was all concrete and tarmac and brick. And the fact that we've got so many green spaces in Birmingham and the West Midlands generally, and street trees and garden trees. I just think it makes a huge difference to the way we feel when we look out of our windows and drive around our streets and go out on the bus and things. I think seeing the trees break up all of those hard surfaces just makes a massive difference. So it's just the way they make the city look, but it's also what they do for the environment and for nature as well, because I mean, we love the garden birds, and we've got trees in our garden, and we've always got a garden full of birds, and I'm sure it's largely to do with the trees because we've got insects and flowers, and I just think they're crucial to the way we feel, as well as obviously the basic things like oxygen and everything else that all the children already know about. But I think it's the aesthetics for me that's really important, especially because we live in a city.
Deb, what about you?
I think it probably started the same way that I've always liked to be in green space, and always spent a lot of time in my local park wherever I've been. But I suppose as I got older, my first job was in the city centre. And I used to get on the train early in the morning, and I'd be in the city centre in an area where there wasn't particularly a lot of trees immediately. But at lunchtime, I would just seek out the first place that I could find, which was actually St Philip's Square.
Mm.
That's where I was. That was my closest space. But it was always like everybody else in the city was there, so so you're sharing it with a lot of other people. And then one day my boss came in and he said, "I'm moving the office to Sutton Coldfield, is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah, no, that's brilliant." And he actually moved it to a semi-detached house with a garden.
Wow.
And he did, it was an old house, and he did it up as an office and put in sliding patio windows into this garden. And he liked Japanese maples, so he filled the garden with Japanese maple trees. And it was just, to me, it was so amazing, the difference between working in an office where I was looking at the wall of the Bank of England, I think it was, for sort of 5 years, and then being in an office where I was just looking into a garden all the time. The difference of the feeling of being at work, and being really close to Sutton Park as well, so I could go there at lunchtimes. It was huge, and I just became more and more attached to the green space and less attached to being in an office, until I realised eventually that understanding nature in a scientific way was what I wanted to do, and teach people about that. So I left my quite well paid job to become, the first thing I did was summer park warden at Cannon Hill Park. Yeah, a park full of trees that I loved being